Imagine for a moment that everything you've been taught about separation, about being an isolated individual navigating through a world of separate things and separate people, was fundamentally incomplete. Imagine that beneath the surface of what we perceive with our five senses, there exists a field of connection so profound, so immediate, and so absolute that it defies everything our Newtonian conditioning has taught us about reality. This isn't just philosophical speculation or mystical wishful thinking. This is quantum physics. This is the science of entanglement, and it may very well be the bridge that finally connects the material world we see with the unified field of consciousness that mystics, sages, and now quantum physicists are pointing toward. When we talk about quantum entanglement, we're talking about one of the most mysterious and counterintuitive phenomena ever discovered in physics. Einstein himself called it spooky action at a distance because it troubled him so deeply. And what troubled Einstein should definitely get our attention. What we're looking at here is the demonstrated fact that two particles, once they interact with each other, remain connected regardless of the distance that separates them. You can take two entangled photons and place one on Earth and send the other to the edge of the galaxy, and when you change the state of one, the other responds instantaneously. Not at the speed of light, not with some kind of signal traveling through space. Instantaneously, meaning faster than light, which according to classical physics should be impossible. Now, pause with me here because this is where it gets really interesting for those of us who are exploring the nature of consciousness. If matter at its most fundamental level doesn't obey the rules of separation and locality that we experience in our everyday three-dimensional reality, what does that tell us about the nature of reality itself? What does it tell us about consciousness, which is the very lens through which we experience and create reality? You see, for decades, materialist science has tried to explain consciousness as merely an emergent property of the brain, as though awareness is something that individual neurons produce when they fire together in certain patterns. But quantum entanglement suggests something radically different. It suggests that at the quantum level, there is no true separation. There is only connection, only relationship, only unity expressing itself in apparently separate forms. Think about your own experience for a moment. Have you ever walked into a room and immediately felt the tension from an argument that just happened, even though no one said a word? Have you ever thought of someone you haven't spoken to in years, only to have them call you within the hour? Have you ever felt the emotional state of someone you love even when they're thousands of miles away? We've all had these experiences, and we usually dismiss them as coincidence or intuition or some vague notion of being sensitive. But what if these experiences aren't anomalies at all? What if they're actually glimpses into the true nature of reality where consciousness isn't confined to individual brains, but is fundamentally interconnected through mechanisms we're only beginning to understand scientifically? The implications of quantum entanglement extend far beyond physics laboratories and theoretical papers. When scientists measure entangled particles, they find that these particles don't have definite states until they're observed. Before measurement, they exist in what we call superposition, which means they exist in all possible states simultaneously. It's only when consciousness enters the equation through the act of observation that the quantum wave function collapses and reality as we know it comes into being. This isn't metaphysics. This is the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, one of the most widely accepted frameworks for understanding the quantum world. The observer isn't separate from the observed. The observer literally influences what manifests in the material realm through the act of observation. Now, let's take this further, because this is where quantum physics starts to sound remarkably like ancient wisdom traditions. For thousands of years, mystics from every culture have described reality as fundamentally one, as an interconnected whole, where separation is an illusion created by the limitations of ordinary perception. The Vedic tradition speaks of Indra's net, an infinite web where each jewel reflects all other jewels.
Buddhist philosophy describes dependent origination, the principle that nothing exists independently, but only in relation to everything else. Indigenous wisdom keepers have always known that we are not separate from nature, from each other, or from the cosmos itself. And now, quantum physics is providing a scientific framework that echoes these ancient insights with startling precision. Quantum entanglement tells us that once two particles have interacted, they form a unified system that cannot be described independently. They share what physicists call a quantum state, and this state persists regardless of spatial separation. In other words, they remain part of a single, undivided whole, even when they appear to be separate. Now, apply this principle not just to photons and electrons, but to every particle in the universe. At the moment of the Big Bang, all matter and energy were unified in a singular point of infinite density and temperature. Every particle in your body, every atom in every star, every quantum of energy in the entire cosmos emerged from that primordial unity. If quantum entanglement is a fundamental property of reality, and it is, then everything in the universe is still fundamentally entangled with everything else. We never actually separated. We only appear to have separated from the perspective of our limited sensory apparatus and our conditioned belief in the solidity and separateness of matter. This brings us to consciousness, the great mystery that science has struggled to explain through purely materialist models. If the physical universe is fundamentally interconnected at the quantum level, and if observation plays a crucial role in collapsing quantum possibilities into classical reality, then consciousness cannot be merely a byproduct of individual brains. Consciousness must be more fundamental than matter itself. It must be the field in which quantum possibilities exist and from which material reality emerges through the process of observation and measurement. This is exactly what quantum physicists like John Wheeler proposed when he suggested we live in a participatory universe where observers are not passive recipients of an objective reality, but active participants in the creation of reality. Consider the famous double-slit experiment, which has been repeated thousands of times with the same bewildering results. When you fire photons or electrons through two slits toward a detector screen, you get an interference pattern, which indicates that each particle is somehow going through both slits simultaneously, acting as a wave of probability. But when you place a detector at the slits to observe which path the particle takes, the interference pattern disappears, and the particle behaves like a solid object, going through one slit or the other. The act of observation literally changes the behavior of matter at the quantum level. The observer effect is real, measurable, and reproducible. Consciousness is not separate from the physical world. Consciousness is deeply entangled with the physical world, influencing its behavior and structure in ways that defy classical understanding. Now, here's where this becomes profoundly practical and not just theoretical. If consciousness is fundamentally interconnected, if we are all entangled at the deepest levels of reality, then your thoughts, your emotions, your intentions, and your states of being are not confined to your individual experience. They ripple out through the quantum field, influencing and being influenced by the collective consciousness of humanity and perhaps even the cosmos itself. This isn't New Age fantasy. This is the logical extension of what quantum physics is revealing about the nature of reality. When you change your internal state, when you shift from fear to love, from separation to unity, from survival to creation, you're not just changing your individual experience, you're changing the field. You're transmitting a signal into the quantum realm that can influence outcomes, synchronicities, and possibilities in ways that transcend the limitations of Newtonian cause and effect. This is why meditation isn't just a relaxation technique. This is why heart coherence isn't just about feeling good. This is why intentional focus and elevated emotional states aren't just psychological tools for personal development. When you meditate deeply, when you generate coherent heart rhythms, when you combine clear intention with elevated emotion, you're literally entangling yourself with different quantum possibilities. You're aligning yourself with frequencies and patterns in the unified field that correspond to health instead of disease, abundance instead of lack, connection instead of isolation, creation instead of survival. You're using the principles of quantum entanglement and observation to collapse quantum possibilities into new realities that serve your evolution and the evolution of the collective.
The research coming out of institutions around the world is beginning to validate what consciousness explorers have known experientially for decades. Studies on the Global Consciousness Project have shown that collective human attention and emotion can influence random number generators, creating order out of randomness during events of mass focus like natural disasters or global celebrations. Research on meditation has demonstrated that practitioners can influence the measurable reality of their bodies and even their genetic expression through focused intention and elevated states of consciousness. Studies on intention and distant healing have shown effects that cannot be explained by classical mechanisms, but make perfect sense if consciousness is fundamentally non-local and entangled across space and time. What we're discovering is that consciousness doesn't exist in time and space. Time and space exist in consciousness. Consciousness is the field, the medium, the fundamental substrate of reality itself, and matter is what consciousness looks like when it slows down into form. Quantum entanglement is not just a property of particles, it's a property of consciousness expressing itself through the language of physics. When two people connect deeply, when a mother feels her child's distress from across the world, when a group of meditators creates measurable changes in their environment, what we're witnessing is consciousness recognizing itself, consciousness entangling with itself, consciousness acting through apparently separate forms to remember its essential unity. This understanding has profound implications for how we live our lives. If we are fundamentally entangled with all of existence, then there truly is no such thing as an isolated action. Every thought contributes to the field. Every emotion broadcasts a frequency. Every choice you make ripples through the fabric of reality, influencing probabilities and possibilities in ways both subtle and profound. The question then becomes, what are you entangling yourself with? Are you collapsing possibilities that reflect fear, limitation, and separation? Or are you aligning with patterns of love, abundance, and unity? Are you operating from the outdated Newtonian paradigm of separation, competition, and survival? Or are you stepping into the quantum paradigm of connection, cooperation, and creation? When you understand entanglement as more than just a physics phenomenon, when you recognize it as the fundamental nature of consciousness itself, you begin to realize your extraordinary power and your profound responsibility. You are not a powerless individual buffeted by external circumstances. You are a focal point of consciousness in the unified field capable of collapsing infinite possibilities into manifest reality through the power of your attention, intention, and emotional state. You are entangled with everything and everyone, which means your healing contributes to collective healing. Your evolution accelerates collective evolution. Your coherence creates ripples of coherence throughout the field of consciousness that connects all things. This is why the ancient wisdom traditions taught practices of compassion, mindfulness, and meditation. This is why they understood that serving others is inseparable from serving yourself, that harming another is harming yourself, that the boundaries we perceive between self and other are illusory constructs of limited awareness. They knew what quantum physics is now confirming. We are not separate.
We have never been separate. We cannot be separate because separation is not a property of fundamental reality. Separation is a perceptual illusion created by identifying consciousness with form, with body, with mind, with individual identity, rather than recognizing consciousness as the infinite field in which all forms arise, exist, and dissolve.
The evidence for consciousness as a unified field doesn't stop with quantum entanglement. Consider the phenomenon of morphic resonance proposed by biologist Rupert Sheldrake, where organisms of the same species seem to share information across space and time through what he calls morphic fields. Consider the studies showing that random number generators respond to collective human consciousness during major global events. Consider the research on twins who feel each other's pain or emotions across vast distances. Consider the documented cases of organ transplant recipients taking on characteristics, memories, or preferences of their donors. Consider the measurable effects of group meditation on crime rates, hospital admissions, and conflict in surrounding areas. All of these phenomena point toward the same fundamental truth. Consciousness is not produced by individual brains. Individual brains are receivers and transmitters of a consciousness that is fundamentally non-local, interconnected, and unified. When we look at quantum entanglement through this lens, it becomes more than an interesting physics curiosity. It becomes a window into the true nature of who and what we are. We are not separate beings having isolated experiences in a random mechanistic universe. We are focal points of awareness in a unified field of consciousness that is intimately interconnected at every level of existence. We are the universe observing itself, knowing itself, experiencing itself from infinite perspectives simultaneously. The apparent separation between observer and observed, between self and other, between consciousness and matter, is a magnificent illusion that allows the one to experience itself as the many while never actually ceasing to be one. This understanding transforms everything. It transforms how we relate to each other, knowing that harming another is harming ourselves, that healing ourselves contributes to healing others. It transforms how we relate to nature, recognizing that we are not separate from the environment, but intimately entangled with every ecosystem, every species, every river and mountain and forest. It transforms how we relate to reality itself, knowing that we are not passive observers of a fixed, objective world, but active participants in a fluid, responsive, participatory universe that reflects our consciousness back to us through the mirror of experience. It transforms how we approach healing, recognizing that consciousness can influence matter, that intention can shape outcome, that the quantum field responds to coherent signals of focused awareness combined with elevated emotion. As we stand at this unprecedented moment in human history, where ancient wisdom and cutting-edge science are converging toward the same revolutionary insights, we're being called to make a choice. We can continue operating from the old paradigm of separation, where we see ourselves as isolated individuals competing for limited resources in a hostile universe, or we can step into the emerging paradigm of unity, where we recognize our fundamental interconnection and begin to operate from coherence, cooperation, and collective evolution. Quantum entanglement isn't just teaching us about particles, it's teaching us about consciousness. It's teaching us about who we really are and what we're truly capable of when we align with the fundamental nature of reality rather than struggling against it. In conclusion, quantum entanglement may indeed be one of the most compelling pieces of scientific evidence pointing toward the unity of consciousness. When particles remain connected across any distance, responding to each other instantaneously regardless of the space between them, we're not just observing a curious property of matter, we're observing the fundamental nature of reality itself, where separation is an illusion and connection is the only truth. When consciousness enters the quantum equation through the observer effect,
literally influencing which possibility becomes reality, we're not seeing consciousness as separate from matter, but as the primary field from which matter emerges. When we recognize that every particle in existence emerged from the same unified source at the moment of the Big Bang and may still be entangled with every other particle, we're seeing a scientific framework that mirrors the perennial wisdom that all is one, that consciousness is the ground of being, that we are not separate individuals, but expressions of a single, infinite, interconnected awareness exploring itself through the magnificent diversity of form. This isn't just philosophical speculation or spiritual fantasy. This is where physics is pointing us. This is what the evidence suggests when we're willing to follow it beyond the comfortable boundaries of materialist assumptions. Quantum entanglement invites us to radically reimagine our place in the cosmos, not as isolated fragments struggling for survival, but as intimately interconnected expressions of a unified consciousness that is the source, substance, and ultimate destination of everything that exists. And when we truly understand this, when we embody this truth in our daily lives, we step into a new way of being that transcends the limitations of the separate self and opens us to the infinite creative potential of the unified field. We become conscious participants in the evolution of consciousness itself, using our awareness, our intention, and our coherence to collapse possibilities that serve not just our individual flourishing, but the flourishing of all life, all consciousness, all existence. This is the promise of quantum entanglement. This is the invitation of unity consciousness. This is the next stage of human evolution, and it begins with the recognition that we have never been separate. We are not separate now, and we will never be separate, because at the deepest level of reality, there is only one consciousness, looking out through infinite eyes, living infinite lives, discovering itself in every moment of existence across all space and time.